The suit was my last clean thing, and it tore on a dead woman's rose trellis. The fabric ripped at the shoulder with a sound like tearing paper, and I froze, crouched behind a withered bougainvillea hedge in a parody of a garden. Twilight was bleeding purple over Scottsdale, Arizona, turning the manicured, silent streets into something from a bad dream. I was panting. A predator who had become prey, and the only thing that mattered was the stitch of pain in my side and the sandpaper in my throat. Thirst is a special kind of hell. It shrinks the world down to a single burning point. It had been 2 days since my last con fell apart. 2 days since the real leader of the survivalist bunker came home and recognized the FEMA logos on my forged ID were 6 weeks out of date. He called me a rat bastard and told me to run, so I ran. My education was never in survival. It was in reading the subtle twitch of a man's eye before he calls your bluff, but I was learning fast. I remembered the day the world stopped pretending. The cascade, they called it. For me, it wasn't a cascade, it was just a sound. The sound of every siren in Las Vegas turning on at once and then, one by one over hours, going quiet. That silence was the real noise. My parents would have thrived in this chaos, a world full of marks ripe for a story about salvation, but they were long gone, swallowed by a fraud charge years before the world swallowed itself. Their lessons were all I had left. Driven by a thirst that felt like swallowing glass, I followed the impossible sight of flickering electric lights on the horizon. It was a stupid risk, a beacon for anyone else desperate enough to see it, but dying in a cul-de-sac felt like a worse choice. It led me here, to Via Alexi. The place was a fortress, surrounded by a 12-foot concrete wall that looked like it was designed to keep the world out long before the world became something worth escaping. I spent the last of the day watching it from a sun-bleached McMansion across the street, my mind cataloging everything I saw. A solar farm glinted on the roof. The walls were clean, unbreached, except for one spot. Near a garbage disposal unit, a small section of the concrete was crumbled at the base, just big enough for a man to crawl through if he was thin and motivated. I also clocked a massive propane tank near the generators in the back, its surface covered in a film of rust. It was a sloppy piece of maintenance, a liability I filed away and dismissed. My focus was on the door, not the demolition. That night, my opening came. A single, gaunt Afflicted, thin as a starved dog, scrambled through the breach I had spotted. It moved with a jerky, unnatural speed, its head twitching as it scanned the perfectly manicured garden. An old woman was inside the walls, calmly examining a rosebush as if the world hadn't ended. I recognized her from my long day of observation. She was frail but stood up straight, with silver hair tied back in a knot. I watched from my hiding place, my curiosity a cold, professional thing. I was ready to use the attack as a diversion to get inside. The Afflicted spotted her and stumbled forward, its jaw working silently. I braced myself. Just as it gathered itself to lunge, a door to the main building slid open, and a young nurse in medical scrubs rushed out. "Miriama, get back inside." The nurse's voice was high with panic. The Afflicted's head snapped around at the sound. Its attention shifted instantly, its milky eyes locking onto the new target. It completely ignored the old woman standing 3 feet away. A perfect victim. The creature launched itself at the nurse, who screamed, a wet, short sound. It tackled him to the grass and bit down hard on his neck. The old woman, Miriama, simply looked on with a faint, polite confusion, as if watching a mildly interesting television program. I did not see a tragedy. I saw a system, a beautiful, exploitable system. The predators were not hunting this specific prey. The villa wasn't just a fortress full of food and electricity. It was a vault filled with living, breathing shields. The plan in my head dissolved and reformed into something much bigger. I no longer wanted to just rob this place. I wanted to own it. The attack threw the villa into a quiet sort of chaos. Lights came on in more windows. People were shouting inside. This was my chance. I slipped through the breach in the wall, my movements quick and silent. I found the nurse, Javier, on the ground. He was already dead. I knelt beside him and smeared his blood on my torn sleeve and the front of my shirt, the warmth of it a shock against my skin. Then I walked calmly toward the open door. A tired-looking man in his 50s, a senior nurse by his uniform, met me in the hallway. He held a heavy flashlight like a club. Panic was rolling off the few staff members behind him. "Who the hell are you?" I held up my hands, projecting a calm authority I had practiced in 1,000 mirrors. "Dr. Alexi Favel, FEMA paramedic. My convoy was ambushed just east of here. I saw your lights." An elderly resident started wailing nearby, a thin, piercing sound that grated on my nerves. It was the kind of noise that drew more of the things from the outside. I moved past the senior nurse. "It's all right, Eleanor," I said, reading the name on her embroidered cardigan. I pitched my voice low and soothing. "Everything is under control now. We're safe." I guided her gently back toward a chair. She looked at me with wide, trusting eyes. The wailing stopped. I had their attention. The senior nurse, Ben, watched me with a deep weariness in his eyes. He was suspicious, but he was also exhausted and out of options. One of his people was dead on the lawn. "You're a doctor?" "Paramedic with security clearance," I corrected, the lie smooth on my tongue. "I can help." He hesitated for a long moment. I could see the calculation in his face, weighing the risk of a stranger against the certain danger of being alone and losing control. He finally nodded, a short, defeated gesture. I walked past him, deeper into the building. I found Javier's empty locker in the staff room and quickly went through it, finding a set of keys and a silver Zippo lighter which I pocketed without a second thought. I was in. I was no longer starving, no longer hunted. The air here was cool and clean, but I had taken on a role, a performance I would have to maintain. My life now depended on the believable fiction that I was here to protect the very people I planned to use. The pump coughed out a stream of brown sludge, then went silent. Ben, the facility's last remaining maintenance man, swore under his breath and slapped the side of the main filtration unit. Nothing. My perfect kingdom had a plumbing problem. He was a good man, Ben, which made him a terrible survivor. He looked at the silent machine with the honest despair of someone who actually cared about the 80-odd souls sleeping in their beds. I saw a different problem. My human shields were about to get thirsty, and thirsty people get unpredictable. For 3 weeks I had been the affable paramedic, the man with a plan, the calm voice in the storm. My position was built on a foundation of cheap charm and expensive lies, and a water shortage could wash it all away. Ben eyed me with the same weary suspicion he'd shown since I arrived. Miriam Asile, my shadow, stood a few feet away, her intelligent eyes clouded. She was searching for her tape recorder again, a quest that gave her a reason to follow me everywhere. Her presence was an annoyance, but it also lent me an air of gentle authority, the kind doctor making his rounds. I walked over to the filtration unit, a complex beast of pipes and gauges I knew nothing about. My father taught me that if you want to control a situation, you first have to control the language. I pointed to a random valve. "It's a pressure fluctuation in a primary intake. The sediment is causing a system-wide backflow." Ben blinked, his practical knowledge colliding with my confident nonsense. I didn't give him time to think. "We can't risk a full purge. We'd lose too much water. I'll have to bypass the main filter and switch us to the secondary cistern." It was a temporary fix I'd spotted on my first tour of the grounds, a simple tank meant for garden irrigation. I knew it would work for a week, maybe 2. More importantly, it was a performance. I spent the next hour turning valves and tightening bolts with theatrical purpose, explaining each step in a stream of plausible gibberish. Ben, out of his depth and desperate for a solution, eventually just handed me the wrenches I asked for. When I was done, I turned the main pump back on. Water, clean and clear, flowed from the tap. Ben's shoulders sagged with relief. "I'll institute rationing," I said, my voice firm with unearned authority. "Half rations until I can recalibrate the main system." He nodded, no longer questioning. He saw a leader. I saw a Mark who had just bought the Brooklyn Bridge in the middle of a zombie apocalypse. That night, feeling smug and secure in my reign, I went to the central breaker room. I had diverted some of the power during my repairs, to sell the idea of a system under strain. Now I flipped every switch back on. The lights of Via Alexi burned brighter against the dark Arizona night. I pulled a silver Zippo from my pocket, a relic from a wealthy widow in Santa Fe, and flicked it open and closed. The metallic click was a satisfying sound in my quiet, orderly world. What I didn't know was that in the security office, my power surge had awakened. A dormant military communications console, a silent machine now listening to the void. The radio crackled to life 2 days later, a harsh burst of static that cut through the common room's placid quiet. A voice, female and devoid of any emotion, came through the speaker. It was a coded, looping message. Seeking verified Alpha-class immunes. Broadcasting coordinates for Project Chimera. High-value compensation for all biological samples. The words were sterile, corporate, for the synthesis of a viable cure. The future is not sentimental. I dismissed it instantly. It was a raider trick, a new kind of lure for the desperate. I was about to shut it off when Miriama, who had been listening with a strange look of concentration, pointed a frail finger toward the infirmary. She was having one of her moments, a brief tear in the fog of her dementia. "There are only 3 boxes left," she stated, her voice as clear as a bell. "Not enough for winter." She was looking at the shelf where we kept the Nero block, the cocktail of psychotropics that kept the residents' minds compromised and, as I now knew, their bodies immune. Her words hit me harder than any broadcast. I went to the infirmary and did a full inventory. She was right. We had less than a 2-month supply. My perfect, timeless sanctuary suddenly had an expiration date. Panic, cold and sharp, pricked at me. I needed more time. I needed more control. I gathered Ben and the other 2 staff members. I told them my FEMA contacts had checked in, that a full resupply convoy was en route and would be here in a couple of months. The lie was smooth, practiced. To keep the residents calm and contained, I announced we would hold a community festival on the main lawn. It was a grotesque parody of normalcy, a way to keep my herd docile while I figured out my next move. 200 miles away, Dr. Alexis Maxim's team registered the brief, powerful signal from my radio. It was a sign of an organized, powered community. They changed course. My lie hadn't just bought me time, it had painted a target on our backs. My one attempt to leave the villa for supplies was a failure. The nearby town was a graveyard patrolled by the Afflicted. I drove a golf cart to a strip mall pharmacy, the electric motor's whisper feeling like a scream in the silence. They were everywhere, standing in their torpor under the midday sun, twitching at the slightest sound. I got what I came for, a few bottles of useless antibiotics and some bandages, but nearly got cornered by 3 of them on the way out. I made it back to the villa, the heavy gate sliding shut behind me, my heart pounding in my chest. The experience solidified a terrible truth. This place wasn't just my sanctuary, it was the only one. A few days later, while scanning the perimeter wall from the roof, I saw a tiny glint in the sky. It was a speck, moving too smoothly to be a bird. I watched it for a minute before dismissing it. In her mobile command center on a nearby hill, Dr. Maxime analyzed the drone footage. She watched the residents walking the garden paths, ignored by a small group of Afflicted shambling aimlessly outside the walls. Her hypothesis was confirmed. She ordered her team to move in, to observe, contain, and then harvest. They jammed all outgoing radio frequencies, isolating us completely. Then, under the cover of dusk, her soldiers moved with silent precision, eliminating the few Afflicted who lingered near our walls. They were not saving us. They were sanitizing their work environment. The world outside Via Alexi went quiet. The silence was not peaceful. It was predatory. I found the infirmary door ajar at dawn. A cold dread washed over me before I even stepped inside. The medicine cabinet was open, half of our remaining neuroblock gone. The patient records were missing. This wasn't a smash and grab. It was a surgical extraction. On the floor, placed perfectly in the center of the room, was a single pristine CDC biohazard container. A calling card. My con was over. The game was up. I went to my room, my hands shaking as I grabbed the small go bag I always kept packed. It held a water filter, a knife, and the last of my forged identity papers. I walked through the common room, heading for the hidden maintenance tunnel I had found weeks ago. Ben was there, trying to soothe a resident who was weeping from the ambient stress. He looked up as I passed, his face a mask of exhaustion. He saw my bag, saw the direction I was heading. He didn't raise his voice. He just whispered, his words full of a quiet, earned contempt. "They trusted you." The barb landed, but I kept walking. A con artist knows when to fold. I had the tunnel grate open when a soft touch on my arm made me freeze. It was Miriama. Her eyes were lost in their usual temporal loop, her mind somewhere in a Parisian lecture hall or a Fijian village. "Are we leaving for the conference?" she asked, her voice gentle. "I can't find my recordings." She looked at me not as a grifter or a fake paramedic, but as a trusted colleague, an anchor in her confusing world. Before I could answer, she carefully untied the worn piece of Fijian masi cloth from her wrist. It was her most precious possession, a memento from her late husband. "Please hold this for me," she said, pressing the soft, patterned fabric into my hand. "I don't want to lose it." The simple, unconditional trust of the gesture was a direct, shattering contrast to Ben's contempt. I could process contempt. It was part of every transaction I had ever made. I could not process this selfless, non-transactional act of faith. It was an unprofitable investment, a key to a vault that held nothing I wanted. A catastrophic system failure occurred deep inside my meticulously constructed worldview. I stood there in the dark tunnel, the grate open to a freedom I suddenly could not take, paralyzed by the weight of a small piece of cloth in my hand. I closed the tunnel grate, sealing my only escape route with a low scrape of metal on concrete. The sound echoed in the narrow space, a definitive, final click like my father's old Zippo lighter snapping shut on a finished con. I walked away from freedom, the soft weight of Miriama's cloth a burning coal in my palm. My entire life had been a series of open doors and quick exits, but the only path left now led back into the heart of the trap. I went to the security office, my kingdom's former nerve center. The bank of monitors showed the quiet halls, the sleeping residents in their beds, their chests rising and falling in blissful ignorance. They were no longer shields or pawns. They were just people, the silent audience to a performance that had finally, catastrophically failed. On the desk, the CDC biohazard container sat like a tombstone. It was a message of clinical intent, a promise that they would be back for their harvest. My philosophy, my belief that every lock could be picked, was a hollow piece of junk wisdom from a life that no longer existed. Miriama's simple trust had proven it worthless. I looked at the patterned cloth in my hand. The con was over. The only choices left were to run, which I could no longer do, or to fight a battle I was certain to lose. I made a decision that felt alien, a choice born of something other than self-interest. If my kingdom was going to burn, I would be the one to light the match. I was no longer trying to preserve my sanctuary. I was choosing the terms of its destruction. I pulled the villa's blueprints from the bottom drawer, a relic of my initial casing of the job. My eyes traced the lines with a new purpose, not looking for weaknesses to exploit for comfort, but for weaknesses I could turn into weapons. My gaze settled on the generator room in the sublevel. I remembered the large, unstable propane tank that fed the backup system, a dangerous piece of infrastructure I had made a note to avoid. A liability was now my only asset. I stopped thinking about survival and started thinking like them, clinically, strategically. I had a plan. It was not a plan to escape. It was a plan to act. A low, rhythmic pulse started to vibrate through the building, a sound so deep you felt it in your bones before you heard it. Maxime's team was beginning the final phase. They were using a sonic lure, a non-lethal method of herding their livestock towards the dining hall for easy collection. I watched the monitors as residents began to stir, drawn from their rooms by the sound. Soldiers in black jumpsuits moved through the halls with a silent, practiced efficiency. They were ghosts with automatic weapons. I ran to the main office and grabbed the microphone for the PA system. I did not sound an alarm. Panic was their ally, not mine. I pitched my voice to the same calm, authoritative tone I had used for weeks. "Attention, residents," I said, my voice carrying into every room. "Tonight's luau has been relocated. All guests attending the luau, please proceed to the East Wing service exit." I saw them on the monitors, their confused shuffling changing direction, creating a current of chaos against the sonic lure's pull. It was an instruction tailored to their broken minds, a last desperate manipulation. I found Ben trying to calm a small group near the lobby. I grabbed his arm, my grip tight. "Get Miriama. Get anyone else you can grab to the maintenance tunnel in the East Wing, now." His eyes were wide with terror, but he saw the new, hard certainty in my face and nodded without a word. He began shepherding Miriama and a handful of others away from the main hall. I turned and ran for the generator room, the silver Zippo a cold weight in my pocket. My objective was no longer escape. It was annihilation. The dining hall was a scene of controlled chaos when I entered. Maxime stood in the center, a specter of cold reason amidst the confused elderly. She saw me, her expression unreadable. Before I could move, 2 of her soldiers grabbed my arms, their grips like iron. She walked toward me, her gray eyes analyzing me not as a threat, but as a fascinating variable. "An efficient form of resource management," she said, her voice a flat monotone. "I can respect that. But you have outlived your usefulness. You are a contamination variable." She gestured to one of her men. "Sedate the woman. Terminate him." A soldier grabbed Miriama's arm. She cried out, a small, frightened sound. In that moment, the fog in her eyes cleared. The confusion vanished, replaced by a sudden, shocking lucidity. She looked directly at me, and I saw no fear, only a complete and devastating understanding. Her hand found mine, her frail fingers gripping my own with surprising strength. That single, genuine connection was the spark. I slammed my elbow back into the glass of a fire alarm on the wall behind me. A deafening klaxon blared through the hall, a raw scream of noise that made the soldiers flinch for a critical second. I broke free, lunging for a small panel on the far wall. I tore it open, my fingers finding the emergency fuel release valve I had jury-rigged an hour before. I twisted it hard. A deep roar came from below us, and the floor shook. The world outside the dining hall windows turned a brilliant, silent white, then a roiling orange. The propane tank erupted in a massive fireball that tore through the villa's foundation, incinerating Maxim's mobile lab and crippling her team. The blast was a titanic boom that would serve as a beacon, a dinner bell for every afflicted within 10 miles. Shrapnel tore through the dining hall. I felt a searing pain in my side as I shoved Miriama toward Ben and the others cowering by the service door. I pushed them into the darkness of the maintenance tunnel, my body screaming in protest. With the last of my strength, I pulled the heavy steel door shut, sealing it from my side. I collapsed against it, the sound of the approaching horde mixing with the roar of the fire. My final act was not for profit or for comfort. It was for an illogical, impossible, deeply human connection. From a hill miles away, a thick column of black smoke billowed into the dawn sky, a funeral pyre for a fallen kingdom. Miriama Saleh stood clutching a small piece of patterned Fijian cloth, her face etched with a profound, lucid sadness as she watched the fire. Her companions gently led her away, into the vast and uncertain wilderness. She did not remember the man's name, only the echo of his sacrifice.